Minus 32 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the wind chill that settled over the south side of Chicago the night this story matters. Not the air temperature, the wind chill, the number that tells you what the cold actually feels like against exposed skin. At minus 32, frostbite on an unprotected hand takes under 5 minutes. A person who falls asleep outside without adequate insulation does not wake up. That is not a metaphor. That is physiology. The city knew it was coming. The National Weather Service had been warning about the polar vortex for 4 days, the dense, rotating mass of Arctic air pushed south from Canada. It is the kind of cold system that meteorologists treat with a specific seriousness they reserve for almost nothing else. Emergency management offices sent alerts. Church organizations opened warming centers. The shelter system activated overflow capacity. Every official system that exists to protect people from this exact kind of cold was running exactly as designed. And in an alley on the south side, a 51-year-old man named Marcus Dillard was on his knees in 17-degree air, pressing duct tape seams flat with the heel of his palm, alone. People walked by. A city worker slowed down, looked at what Marcus was building, shook his head, and kept walking. A group of teenagers stopped, took a picture, laughed, moved on. Another man sleeping rough in the same neighborhood stood there for a long moment and told Marcus directly, told him he was a fool, that whatever that thing was, it was going to fail, that he would freeze, that he would be sorry. Marcus said nothing. He kept building. What he was building was a shelter out of flattened cardboard, thick plastic sheeting, foam panel offcuts from a roofing dumpster 2 blocks away, and $64 worth of silver duct tape. It looked exactly like what it sounds like. It looked like something a person builds when the system has run out of room for them. It also worked better than almost anything the system had to offer. Before Marcus, there was a different version of him. 15 years of it. He had spent those 15 years working in HVAC, doing installation and repair, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. The trade spends every day solving one specific problem: how heat moves, where it goes when you want to keep it, and how you stop it from going where you do not. It is a deeply unglamorous expertise. Most people never think about it, but it is also, it turns out, one of the most directly applicable bodies of knowledge a human being can possess when their life depends on staying warm. The company folded. The apartment went with it. The safety nets that are supposed to catch people in that situation turned out, in Marcus's case, to have gaps. He fell through entirely, quietly, without ceremony, without anyone particularly noticing until he was already at the bottom. That was 3 winters before the polar vortex. 3 winters of learning the hard way what actually works and what does not. 3 winters of testing the difference between what official emergency guidance tells you about surviving the cold and what the cold itself actually teaches. By the time that alley became his construction site, Marcus Dillard understood something about winter survival that most people who have never had to stake their life on the question simply do not know. He understood that warmth is not a thing you find, it is a thing you engineer. Here is what he built, not just what it looked like what it did and why, because the gap between those two things is the entire story. The structure was roughly the size of a large walk-in closet, an outer shell of heavy wax-coated produce boxes, the kind so thick you can barely punch through them with a fist, an inner shell of double-walled appliance cardboard, and between the two walls, a deliberate engineered 4-inch gap. That gap is where most people's intuition fails them. We tend to think of insulation as a material that blocks cold, something dense and solid standing between you and the outside air, but that is not how insulation works at the physical level. Insulation works by trapping air, specifically still, motionless air. Motionless air is one of the worst conductors of heat that exists. It barely lets thermal energy pass through at all. As Marcus laid each sheet of cardboard and taped each seam, what he was actually doing was building pockets, layer after layer of trapped, still air between himself and the outside. Dense, double-walled corrugated cardboard carries a thermal resistance that sounds modest on paper and behaves remarkably in practice when stacked. 6 deliberate layers, with gaps between them, produce a wall with genuine insulating capacity, comparable to what building codes require for new residential construction in cold climates. He built that with boxes from behind a grocery store. The plastic sheeting came next, construction-grade, 6mm polyfilm, the heavy material they used to wrap entire buildings on job sites. Marcus wrapped the complete outer shell of the structure with it, floor to ceiling, overlapping the seams and running tape over every joint. The people who watched thought he was wrapping his shelter in garbage bags. What he was actually doing was something far more deliberate. He was sealing out moisture. This is the part that appears in almost no emergency cold weather guidance you will ever receive from a civilian agency, and it is arguably the most important part. When warm air meets a cold surface, it condenses. The moment any insulating material gets wet, cardboard, down, wool, foam, anything, it loses most of its thermal resistance almost instantly. A soaking wet insulating layer does not just stop working. In cold weather, it works against you, pulling heat away from your body faster than bare air would. Marcus knew this. 15 years of watching what moisture does inside wall assemblies, inside duct systems, inside improperly sealed building envelopes, he had seen exactly what condensation does to a structure's thermal performance. And he sealed against it with the same methodical precision he would have brought to a commercial installation. Every seam, every joint, every potential penetration point, overlapping runs of tape applied with the systematic care of someone who understood exactly what was at stake if he missed a spot. The duct tape was not cosmetic. It was structural. It was the difference between insulation that works and insulation that fails in the first hour. The floor came next, and this is the step that almost every piece of official emergency preparedness guidance skips entirely. Not minimizes, skips, as though it does not exist. The ground beneath you when you sleep outside is not neutral. The earth is an enormous, cold, dense, relentless heat sink. It will draw warmth out of your body through any surface in direct contact with it, steadily and continuously, at a rate that still cold air at the same temperature cannot match. A person sleeping on bare concrete in a 0-degree rated sleeping bag will lose dangerous amounts of body heat through the ground within hours. The sleeping bag insulates the top half of their body from the air. It does almost nothing for the contact surface. Marcus laid his foam panel offcuts, edge to edge across the entire floor area. No gaps. Then cardboard over the foam. Then a layer of plastic sheeting over the cardboard. He had built an insulated sleeping platform with a total material cost of $0, operating on the same physical principles as the raised insulated sleeping systems that outdoor gear companies sell to mountaineers for $400 a unit. Get off the ground first. That is the hierarchy. That is the thing the foil blanket in your emergency kit cannot do for you. The roof was where 15 years of professional experience showed most clearly, and you would only know it if you understood what the shape was doing. Marcus built it with a slight inward taper, wider at the base and narrowing toward the peak. It looked like a construction shortcut. It was the opposite. It was applied thermodynamics. Warm air rises and cold air sinks. In a small enclosed space with a flat ceiling, warm air produced by your body collects at the top and builds pressure against the seams, looking for any gap to escape through. A tapering geometry compresses that warm air into a tighter dome directly above the sleeping position. It reduces the total interior volume that needs to be heated. It concentrates the warmth where the body actually is, rather than letting it pool uselessly overhead. The Inuit arrived at the same geometry over thousands of years of Arctic living. The igloo's domed interior is not aesthetic. It is thermal engineering, refined by the highest stakes iterative testing process that has ever existed. Survival itself. Marcus arrived at the same conclusion through a different route, 15 years of watching how heat behaves inside enclosed spaces, and 3 winters of paying with his life for every wrong answer. The entry was a double baffle, 2 overlapping flaps of heavy plastic sheeting weighted at the bottom with rolled cardboard. No zipper, no rigid frame. Cold air entering from outside has to navigate 2 separate barriers, losing momentum and temperature at each layer before it ever reaches the interior. The principle is identical to an airlock. The physics do not care about the materials. If any of this is changing how you understand warmth, insulation, or what you would actually need in a real cold weather emergency, subscribe. This channel goes past the surface explanation, past the packaged answer, and into how things actually work when your life depends on them. More of that is coming. The night the polar vortex arrived, Marcus crawled into his shelter, sealed the double flap behind him, and lay down on his insulated floor platform. He had a cheap digital thermometer he had found months earlier. He had been using it all winter to track interior temperatures across different improvised sleeping arrangements, the way an engineer logs data, because that is exactly what he was doing. Applied research, the kind you run when the sample size is 1 and failure is not a number in a report, but a body that does not get back up. Interior temperature when he sealed the entry, 3 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside, minus 17 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind chill, minus 32 degrees Fahrenheit. He lay still. His body began doing what human bodies always do, generating heat. Roughly 80 watts of continuous thermal output, all day, every day, regardless of circumstance. The same 80 watts that dissipate into open air within minutes and help you almost not at all. The 80 watts that, inside a small, sealed, insulated space, have nowhere to go but into warming the air directly around you. At 40 minutes, he checked the thermometer. 11 degrees Fahrenheit, 8 degrees of gain. 40 minutes, 1 sleeping human body. A structure built from trash. That is not a miracle. That is thermodynamics. That is what happens when you stop adding 1 layer of protection against the cold and start building a system, multiple mechanisms working simultaneously, each one compounding the effect of the others. The shelter held the air. The insulation slowed the air from cooling. The vapor barrier kept the insulation dry. The ground layer stopped the earth from pulling heat downward. The baffled entry slowed infiltration. The tapered geometry concentrated the warmth. All of it at once, not a product, a system. He did not sleep comfortably that night. 11 degrees is not comfortable by any reasonable standard, but it is survivable, biologically, metabolically survivable. The human body has reserves it can draw on at 11 degrees that it cannot access at minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit, because at minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit, the math stops being uncomfortable and becomes you are running out of time. Marcus had bought himself entirely out of that second category. With cardboard and tape and knowledge the system had never once thought to give him. There is a question this story forces you to sit with, and it does not have a clean answer. The emergency management systems that exist in American cities are real. The people staffing them are, in most cases, doing genuine work. The shelter systems serve real people who would otherwise have nowhere to go. None of that is the problem. The problem is simpler and harder to fix. The official toolkit for cold weather survival was never designed around the physics of how a human body loses heat. It was designed around what can be distributed at scale, rapidly, without explanation required. It was designed around what photographs well at a press conference. It was designed around what fits in a branded kit and gets a procurement contract renewed. A foil emergency blanket does a real thing, but it does one thing alone. With no ground insulation, no vapor sealing, no dead air layering, No wind protection at the seams. It is a single mechanism sold as a complete answer to a problem that requires four mechanisms working at once. The gap between what it promises and what Marcus built in that alley, that gap is not malice. It is something more mundane and more durable than malice. It is what happens when the packaged solution is funded and the free solution requires knowledge that nobody bothered to put in the pamphlet. Marcus had the knowledge. He had spent 15 years acquiring it for entirely different reasons. The cruelty of his situation was that those 15 years turned out to be exactly the preparation required for a problem no one should ever face. The U.S. Army FM 2176 Survival Manual is publicly available and free, and it contains more accurate, more practically useful guidance on improvised cold weather shelter construction than every civilian emergency preparedness document combined. Search for it by name. Read the cold weather chapter. It will quietly contradict almost everything you have ever been told by a government agency about surviving extreme cold, not because the agencies are lying, but because the manual was written for people whose lives depended on the answer being correct. If you take one thing from this, the hierarchy is 3 steps. Get off the ground first, seal against wind and moisture second, trap dead air third, in that order, always that order. That is what Marcus knew. That sequence kept him alive at minus 32 degrees while the system handed out foil blankets 2 blocks away. There's one detail about this story I keep returning to. When Marcus checked that thermometer at 40 minutes and read 11 degrees, 8 degrees above where he started, he didn't celebrate. He didn't feel relief exactly. What he felt, by his own account, was closer to confirmation. He had run the calculation in his head before he ever taped the first seam. He had known, with the precision of someone who spent 15 years thinking about heat transfer, that the structure would perform within a predictable range. He had built it to spec. The people who laughed were not wrong that it looked absurd. A man in an alley taping cardboard boxes in 17-degree air. It looked like surrender. It looked like someone making a small, sad gesture toward survival. What it actually was a man who knew something true, applying that knowledge carefully and precisely under conditions that did not permit a single mistake. The knowledge was always there. It was always available. It just wasn't in the pamphlet.